a synopsis of Huntington's disease and common practices. Here I focus in on mitochondria dysfunctionality, though the selective vulnerability of certain neurons may also be due to reduced phosphorylation of HTT or the related protein with REST with specific localization. The striatum, basal ganglia, and substance nigra region is notably vulnerable because of lack of movement control seen in patients. This is located in the upper portions of the midbrain below the thalamus. The pars compacta uses dopamine neurons to send signals up to the striatum. The tail end of the Huntington protein is what's majorly affected here, and it's the proliferation of CAG trinucleotide DNA sequence, which encodes a polyglutamine tract. Abnormal protein interactions lead to the disease, which basically results in protein misfolding, and that mutant protein can interact with DRP1. And this protein is a fission mediator for mitochondria, as you can see, via the protein kinase A pathway. It moves from the cytosol to wrap around the membrane of the mitochondria and increase division and neuronal susceptibility to apoptosis in rat neurons and in fibroblasts from people affected with HD.
Huntington's disease is a hereditary autosomal dominant neurodegenerative disorder. This disease does not have a cure. It occurs in about 5 out of 100,000 people. Onset typically occurs between the ages of 30 and 50, but it can occur in children. When this happens, it's called juvenile Huntington's disease. The disease itself lasts for about 15 years before it becomes fatal, and when it is fatal, it's usually as a result of pneumonia or suicide. Symptoms include motor symptoms such as losing the ability to make voluntary movements. This starts off in the extremities and in parts of the face like the eye, and it later leads to difficulty swallowing and delayed movements. It can also manifest in cognitive symptoms such as slowed processing skills, lack of awareness, and lack of impulse control. And finally, it can result in psychiatric disorders, especially depression, mania, OCD, and bipolar disorder.
Diagnosis of Huntington's disease. Most common offsetting characteristics include ALS, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's. This is a neurological disorder in which nerve cells of the brain in the basal ganglia break down over time. It's known as a quintessential family disease because every child of a patient with Huntington's disease has a 50% chance of carrying the faulty gene. It's also shown there in the pedigree chart. We have the gene encoding for Huntington's disease, but those who actually have Huntington's disease have the expanded Huntington's disease gene. That's why they have the disease. Ultimately, Huntington's disease is fatal, and those with Huntington's disease will succumb to pneumonia, heart failure, or other complications. Early stages include subtle changes in coordination, difficulty thinking throughout problems, and just a depressed mood. Once it progresses, however, patients become more and more dependent on others for assistance. Choking becomes a big concern. Death from Huntington's is often than not a result of its complications and not the actual disease itself. Gross examination of brain scans reveals atrophy of the caudate nucleus and putamen and dilation of the anterior horns of the lateral ventricles. Biochemical analysis of striatum in Huntington's disease reveals loss of neurotransmitters like GABA, acetylcholine, and glutamate, which correlates to loss of small neurons. The pars compacta also uses dopamine neuron to send signals up to the striatum. And a decrease in GABA and unbalanced dopamine activity can result in forms of chorea.
Common treatments include drugs, physical therapy, and talk therapy to help with the pain associated with Huntington's disease, since no cure currently exists. Antidepressants and antipsychotic drugs, they both help with the involuntary jerkiness that is associated with the disease, and the therapy helps stabilize the muscles and kind of keep your body from all the shaking. And the next slide is going to talk more about some drugs that are used. Right.
So antidepressants, they help alleviate the pain or the depression felt during Huntington's disease by releasing more serotonin and allowing it to be in the synapse for a longer time. Antipsychotic drugs, they suppress the violent outburst associated with the disease, and the mood stabilizing drugs, they help prevent the extreme bipolar disorder. All right, and now current research, editing DNA strands to try and remove the Huntington gene, which is the main gene in Huntington's disease. Then we also have mitochondrial dynamics that explain why the energy production is significant in Huntington's disease, and it talks more about how the mitochondria plays a role in Huntington's disease. And then drug therapy, they use medications for cancer, but they use it for Huntington's disease, and they have two special components in it that they take care of the misfolding proteins. And the last one is the role of therapy, as we mentioned before, which teaches you how to control the muscles and improve stability. And now citations.